Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. Oh, I'm over look at the amount of Post-its and papers in front of me, the amount of news that has gone down in the past few days. I'm really looking forward to getting back in front of you and talking with all of you about all of it. And we begin with the Democratic Party in massive turmoil over the continued fallout from President Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance. Polls, most of them, there's one outlier, cratering, donors fleeing, including very top, very wealthy ones, more politicians calling for Mr. Biden to step aside, and new alarming reporting about what Joe Biden is really like behind the scenes, highlighting the true scope of his cognitive decline. And yet the president remains defiant. He gave a brief interview to ABC News on Friday night with George Stephanopoulos. We'll get to that. I mean, it was incoherent. He can't finish a sentence or a thought. He's in denial about his condition in this race and his approval rating, his polls, you name it. And then again, this morning, I guess this is meant to dissuade people from thinking he's not capable. He decided to appear via telephone on his favorite TV show, Morning Joe, calling in for a surprise phoner. I said this when Fox News was doing this with Trump. All right, I said this while I was at Fox News about the Fox and Friends program allowing Trump to call in when he was a candidate. It's inappropriate. It's unethical with a presidential candidate. They could easily be sitting there reading notes, mimicking what an advisor says. A fast typist could be getting his answers into a teleprompter. It's not ethical for any news outlet to allow this of a presidential candidate. But they did because they're about propaganda on MSNBC and in particular on Morning Joe. The president this morning set up to succeed, I'll let you decide whether he did, challenged his critics and the so-called elites in his own party. Listen here.
Remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me in the convention.
I think most of the Democrats at this point would say, great, let's do that. We would love that. Joining me now for the full show, Stu Burguiere, the host of Stu Does America on BlazeTV, and Dave Marcus, a columnist for Fox News and the Daily Mail. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X. Let me tell you a story about a guy named Leo Grillo. Leo was on a road trip and came across a Doberman. This dog was severely underweight and clearly in trouble. Leo rescued the dog and named him Delta. Sadly, Delta was just one of many animals that needed help. And this inspired Leo to start Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary in the world. They have rescued thousands of dogs, cats, and horses from the wilderness, and they provide their animals with shelter, love, safety, a home. April marked 45 years since Leo rescued Delta. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions. And if you would like caring for these animals to be part of your legacy, speak with your estate planner because there are tax benefits too. You can grow your estate while letting your love for animals live well into the future. Check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more and speak with your advisor. We call dogs a man's best friend for a reason. You can help those who need it most. Visit deltarescue.org today to learn more. That's deltarescue.org. Stu, Dave, welcome back. Things to say, massive turmoil on the Democratic side right now really was an understatement. And I guess we should pick it up with the president now trying to save himself with an interview with George Stephanopoulos, a pair of interviews with two black radio hosts in Pennsylvania, one of whom has now been fired, both of whom have now admitted that they just asked the questions the White House provided them. And frankly, I can tell you right here from this seat, the same is true of Morning Joe. Guaranteed. It was rehearsed. It was understood between them exactly where they'd go with this interview. And the choreography of the whole thing was set between the sitting president and his BFFs posing as some sort of journalistic figures over at MSNBC this morning. Stu, what do you make of it?
Fascinating stuff. I mean, this has been one of the most incredible week or two periods that I can ever remember in politics. I mean, the debate performance was one of the most catastrophic things I've ever seen occur in politics for a candidate. And now this fallout, which has been amazing, everything from the media completely changing and morphing into like this group of people that actually like hold, a president on the Democratic side to account. All of a sudden, they're doing their scattered showers of journalism all over the place, which has been fascinating to watch. And of course, the Morning Joe thing is just hilarious. Just a couple of months ago, Joe Scarborough was on the air saying, this guy is not only cogent, but he's the best he's ever been. He was saying that it was a conspiracy theory, that they kept underestimating him at their own peril. Then it seemed for a couple of days, I guess, that he was supposed to be, it was really bad performance and maybe he should be thinking about his legacy. And then today he seems to be back on the bandwagon. I mean, the man seems to have absolutely no beliefs that are actually real other than what will get him more conversations at a cocktail party. He seems to have no soul. The way that because there's this thing that happens when normal humans communicate with each other, Megyn, which is when you're saying something that you know to be a blatant lie, you feel this internal level of shame. You feel uncomfortable doing it. Most people feel this. Joe Scarborough has mastered the skill to not feel any shame whatsoever when he says blatantly untrue things that disagree with each other moments apart. It is a parlor trick I didn't know anyone had, but in reality, it's disgusting. And
we have this put together, Stu. So Joe Scarborough, this morning in his interview with the president, if you hear the questions, he goes on like the elites, the politicians, the press, they're calling for you to step out of this race. These people who think they know better. You're one of them, you dishonest dumbass. To your point, Stu, we put together just this past couple of weeks, evolution and back Scarborough's on Joe Biden. All right, here he is. You'll hear the SOP montage where initially he's talking about how Joe Biden's the greatest ever, best he's ever been. And then after the debate, how he sounded. And then a few days went by and he reversed messaging again. And now he's out there pretending he wasn't one of the ones calling for Biden to step down. Listen.
He's far beyond cogent. In fact, I think he's better than he's ever been. He said he spent much of the night with his mouth agape and his eyes darting back and forth. I fear Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States unless things change. And tragically did not rise to the occasion. And now is a good time. In June, thank God, in June and not October, in June, this is the last chance for Democrats to decide whether this man we've known and loved for a very long time is up to the task. Let's take a deep breath and let's understand it's only July the 5th. Such an historic decision should not be made in haste.
It's unbelievable, Stu, right? Thank God we know in June. Hey, you know what? Actually, it's only July. Like, don't make the decision in haste. Anything could happen. He could turn this whole thing around.
I really do think it's incredible. And if we should all remember here, too, that when it felt like the right thing to do to be buddies with Donald Trump, that's also what he was. He was bringing him on television.
Licked them
licked the
openly
boots on a
every
daily
morning.
basis. Yeah. Brought him on. They went to each other's weddings and like hung out and were buddies to the extent that even off the air, leaked video showed that he was basically asking Donald Trump what questions he wanted to be asked. The same thing these poor reporters and radio hosts got fired for this weekend, he was doing to Donald Trump. And now he's completely reversed himself multiple times because whatever benefits Joe Scarborough on that day is what he says. That's who the guy is. He is one of the lowest forms in the entire media and has been his entire life.
So, Dave, as interesting as Scarborough's hypocrisy and lies are, the presidents are far more interesting. And here he was sounding more vibrant this morning than he has over the past weekend and several years, trying to convince us that he is staying in this race and that really the focus should be on Trump's terrible performance at the debate. Satu.
And I've not lost. I haven't lost. I beat him last time. I'll beat him this time. And this is a guy who, look, we talk about debates. Look at his performance at debates. He lied over, Trump has 50 lies. I mean, look, this is a guy who says 10% of the universe. I don't want to get into it. He's just a liar. And he hasn't done a damn thing since the debate. He's been riding around in a golf cart for 10 days or down in Mar-a-Lago talking with his wealthy friends. I'm not running because of these guys, Joe. I'm running because, and you know me well enough to know this from the very beginning, I ran because I never bought on to the trickle-down economic theory. I never bought into the notion that we have to walk away from the rest of the world and cave to Putin or anybody else. I've never believed any of that. And I'm confident that's where the American people are. So what I did was I went out and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any slippage at all. And with the average voter, I don't care what the millionaires think.
Okay. So it's amazing, Dave, that he's calling attention to the fact that Trump's been silent for 10 days, which is the most disciplined Donald Trump has ever shown in his life. It's exactly the right move. He's trying to bait him into saying something so he can shift the story off of himself.
Yeah, no, Trump has played this very well, including the night of the debate. But listen, I'm so frustrated by all of this. And I talk to so many Americans who are so deeply frustrated because we are watching right now why nobody trusts politicians, why nobody trusts pundits. We all watched that debate. We know what we saw. It wasn't a close call. That was a senile man, at least on the edge of dementia, who is absolutely unfit to be the president of the United States. There is no question about that. Right. We all knew it. Our jaws were on the floor. But by the next morning, all of the politicians and all of the pundits were saying to themselves, all right, how do we spin this? How do we describe this? Because, well, the Republicans, they don't think he's fit for office, but they'd rather run against him. And the Democrats, they don't mind the deep state running things, but now they're worried he might lose. And the American people are watching all of this and they're saying, you people don't give a shit about us. You don't give a shit about the country. You're worried about maintaining power. So let me try to break this cycle. Joe Biden is not fit to be president of the United States on July 8th, 2024. I don't care if it helps the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians. He's not fit to be president, and everybody ought to just be able to say that. It's infuriating.
I totally agree with you on every word. It's infuriating that he gets to remain president between now and January, no matter what happens. You're right. He's not fit. This person cannot be the president. There are more gaffes even this weekend, which we're going to show the audience, but I want to go through the news sequentially because it's just easier to digest that way. He got out there not only on Morning Joe this morning, but he had this sit down with George Stephanopoulos, the big sit down. ABC News initially was going to release a little bit on their evening program on Friday night with David Muir. Then they were going to release some with Stephanopoulos on his Sunday show. And then the big kahuna was going to be this morning on Good Morning America. Well, that didn't happen because he only sat there for 22 minutes. And you can't make 3 programs out of a 22-minute interview with the president. And so they released the whole 22 minutes on Friday. And it was another disaster. He was incoherent. Once again, as we saw during the debate, he could not finish a sentence. He kicked off with this, where he's not even sure whether he watched the debate on television after it happened or not. SOT 5.
Your friend Nancy Pelosi actually framed the question that I think is on the minds of millions of Americans. Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It's a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted.
And did you ever watch the debate afterwards?
I don't think I did, no.
What is that, Dave?
Listen, Joe Biden wouldn't know if he was watching Matlock half an hour ago. I mean, that's what it means. I mean, that's all that it can mean. Look, I think you've made a very good point of, about Jill Biden's role in this, right? Now we know that the great intellectual Hunter Biden is the primary advisor and gatekeeper to the president of the United States right now. They've admitted that he can only actually function between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. I mean, this is turning into a Monty Python sketch. It's a level of absurdity that I don't think I've seen before. But I will say this. It reminds me of COVID in a sense. One of the things I stressed in my book was that it was horrible that COVID happened during an election year. It was the worst possible timing because as soon as there started to be a difference of approach in the summer, right? And DeSantis is saying maybe we can open up and Cuomo's saying no, we can't. Everyone got into their political silos and we were just not able to have a rational conversation. And I feel like that's happening here and we're just stuck in this cycle. I feel like if we had the moon landing today, by the next morning, both sides would be arguing over whether it really happened or did it really matter or is it worth getting excited over? We just don't share the same reality.
Yeah, and you speak of elder abuse. That's how I see what's happening now. I tweeted out over the weekend, this is infuriating because what you have here is a critical, wounded horse. And instead of, I'm not saying putting him down, but instead of caretaking the horse, they're making him run again. The cruelest stable owners wouldn't put the horse back out there to watch him die on the track or take a split bone and turn it into a massive compound fracture of a femur, right? Like, that's what they're doing right now, saying, just run, just keep running, get out there. And that's why he gives answers like, I'm not sure if I've watched the debate. I'm not sure. As he just pointed out, it happened a week ago. A week. It was 8 days when he sat down with Stephanopoulos, and he doesn't remember. Here was another, he kept saying, no excuses, no one's fault but mine. But then he kept making excuses for why he performed so poorly. And the latest was Trump was yelling, even though the mics were cut. SOT 6.
How quickly did it come to you that you were having that bad night?
Well, it came to me as having a bad night when I realized that even when I was answering a question, even though they turned his mic off, he was still shouting. And I let it distract me. I'm not blaming it on that. But I realized that I just wasn't in control.
Stephanopoulos followed up by saying, some of this began, your confusion, even before Trump weighed in. And he just didn't have an answer. He didn't, because there is no answer. It wasn't Trump's yelling. It wasn't the mics. Again, in this interview, he said, I was exhausted. Last week, at the end of the week, he said it was my travel schedule. Jet lag, we've heard. Overprepared with details. He raised that again. None of that was the answer. And everyone knows it, Stu. I mean, that's the problem he's up against. He can say everything he wants here. And the only question is, who's going to go along with it because they want the gaslighting to continue because they still believe in him? And who's not, either because, like us, they don't think he's qualified to hold his position, or because, like the Democrats who want to win, they realize he can't do it. And they just love him or hate him. They know they need to get him out of there unless, in order to hold on to control of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, and the sad thing is, I think if you go the week period from the debate to that interview, the interview was the best moment for him. I think, it was horrible, but it was, I guess, better than the debate. When we were doing live coverage on BlazeTV of the debate, and it ended, and I couldn't even think of what to say. It was jaw-dropping. I'd never seen anything like it. And in any sane society, obviously, he would not be president. My first thought coming out of that coverage was, good God, I have kids who live in this country, that this man is in charge of managing in some way. I mean, you start thinking about, are my kids going to wind up getting blown up because of a mistake he makes? We've got
He's the leader of our military. He's the commander-in-chief of our military.
Yeah, it is. I think the biggest threat to our entire globe right now is the fact that we have this guy as president managing the situation between Ukraine and Russia. God only knows how that spirals out of control. He keeps telling them that we're sending them more and more arms that go deeper and deeper to their territory, crossing his own red lines. It's a whole nother topic, but it's very, very disconcerting. But I think when you go back to whether he's going to try to hold on to power, number one, give some of the blame to Joe Biden. Yes, he is the racehorse, as you pointed out, that is limping very heavily. And so it is sad to watch. But this man has wanted this power since at least 1972. It's all he's thought about. He has wanted to be this man, and I don't think he has any intent of giving it up himself, whatever coherent moments he has during the day. And yes, you have Jill Biden and Hunter Biden. Hunter may have a little bit of interest having his dad be ahead of the DOJ right now. Of course, he's going to argue for him to stay in. But it's not just them. I mean, look at the people around him. You think Antony Blinken has a good job after this is over? I mean, you think everyone's like, oh, wow, I can't wait to hire Antony Blinken. Does Karine Jean-Pierre have a gig outside of Applebee's when this is over? It's over for these people. What else are they going to do but argue, stay in power, because all of their life is justified by this man having power. So they have nothing else.
Can I follow up with you on that? There's a report in the Politico about, which is, I have to say, doing a great job on this. They have reasons, as you know, to be covering this story aggressively. Where were you when the rest of us were doing it? In any event, about how that meeting he had last week with the Democratic governors, and after he had that meeting to try to assuage concerns. And by the way, at that meeting, the governors of New Mexico and Maine told him, you're going to lose our states. Our states are now in jeopardy. These are not swing states. These are blue states. And all the news reported, those two governors stood up and said, they're in jeopardy, sir, as a result of you. Anyway, you didn't have a flow of Democratic governors coming out and saying he's got to step down after that meeting. And you know why? Political reporting. It's because they want to run. They all see themselves as the next Democratic presidential candidate in 4 years. And so they don't want a young, potentially two-term Democrat winning other than Joe Biden right now. They'd much rather put the racehorse out there and let him limp through another 4 years, and then they can emerge as the saviors 4 years from now. It's craven how little these people love America. They only love themselves, Stu.
That is 100% true. And it's important to understand their motivation. I mean, I think you mentioned Politico, which I was looking at the Politico homepage the day after the debate. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was harder on Joe Biden than, I don't know, Breitbart is on a daily basis. the New York Times, looks like the Blaze and Daily Wire. Like, I don't know where this has come from. And actually, I do know, of course, where it's come from, which is they now, for this short period, believe that doing actual journalism is the right thing to do because they believe Trump is going to win. They believe that this is their opportunity to get him out. And I promise you, the second they cannot have a replacement, the second that is out of the picture, they will switch back. They will all of a sudden start talking about, actually, he's starting to be more coherent in these meetings. Actually, we're getting reports that this is turning around. Maybe it was just a bad night. They will reverse themselves and act like none of this ever happened if he stays in and survives the next couple of weeks. They will basically go on the air and say that, President Biden, who promised to cure cancer, must have come up with a cure for Alzheimer's instead because he's now magically in control of all of his faculties. They will reverse themselves. It is kind of weird, though, to live in this world where kind of journalists are doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, they seem to be honest.
I love how they're pretending like, gee, we just stumbled upon this story, which was being covered up by the White House. And so here we are in earnest now, ready to cover it. I mean, there's a nugget of truth in there, Dave. There has been a massive cover up by the White House, for sure. They've been masking just how bad the problem is. But all of us on the screen right now have been covering Joe Biden's obvious struggles with dementia. It's not a medical diagnosis, it's just a layperson's observation for years. And it's been ignored by all these same people who are like, oh, cover up. Meanwhile, I want you to respond to that, but I do want to get back to the elder abuse line because that's how this feels. Yes, he's ambitious. Yes, he's the most, aggressively political person in his circle. But when someone becomes infirm, personally, I give them a longer leash because it's up to the family members when that happens to step in. That's why you can go in and you get power of attorney when this happens to a parent or a grandparent. Yeah, you say to the court, I love my mom, my dad, my grandma, but they're no longer capable of making decisions. And so please give me the power to make the decisions for them. And the courts do it regularly because they understand that person, while they may have many moments of lucidity, overall, they've lost the capacity to make big decisions for themselves. That's why the family's more culpable here. Michael Moore, of all people, who literally today was calling Donald Trump the devil, made a similar point on, I think it was a podcast interview. Take a listen. Stop for.
I have to be the only one to stand for Joe Biden. That's right. That's me. You heard me say that. If I have to be the only one to stand up for Joe Biden here, to protect him from the cruelest form of elder abuse I've ever been forced to watch, well, then that's what I'll do. He was in epic distress that Thursday night. Every cognitive default in his mind seemed to be shutting down. If this had been somebody that you truly cared about, loved, embraced, what would you have done?
Yeah, that was Rumble with Michael Moore. It's his podcast. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, look, the question of what we knew about Biden's condition is tricky because the White House actually did do a pretty effective job of shielding the worst of it, it seems. It also may have gotten progressively much worse very quickly.
Yeah,
you know, we don't know. But it's almost like the mafia, right? Like we all knew, apologies to Carol Markowitz, the mafia doesn't exist. We all knew the mafia existed, right? But until the commission case, we didn't have the evidence. We really couldn't prove it, right? This would be like if John Gotti had walked into a restaurant and like murdered 25 people on camera. It just became completely obvious that this was real. And I think the Democrats and the media ultimately have the same dilemma, which is that it's probably going to happen again. So I think Stu's right that the liberal media would be perfectly willing to reverse themselves, and somehow the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, if Biden stays in the race, are going to endorse him, even though they already called for him to leave, right? Somehow they're going to square that circle. But the real question is, if they do that, and it does happen again, because it will happen again, will there start to be consequences? Are we already starting to see consequences, right? Is the economic failure of CNN and MSNBC owing to the fact that the American people just aren't buying it anymore? And it seems like CNN in particular, every time they try to fix it, they just revert back to the same Trump-hating, Brian Stelter-loving thing that they've been since the golden escalator. I don't understand it. I think
that's how
Scott
they're going to do it.
A couple people.
That's how they're going to do it, Dave. They're going to. Yeah. If Biden stays in, there'll be a day of, okay, we were against it, but that's his decision. He's got the delegates.
Yeah, but then what? But Megyn,
and then,
what do you do then?
But wait,
here, and
then the whole remaining period, however, I mean, it's going to at most it's going to be 3 months, will be about how evil Trump is. That's it. Just Biden won't be the story. It'll just be Trump is the devil. It'll be he's the devil. And therefore, and I have to tell you, I was talking to a Democrat friend of mine over the weekend who I love, a wonderful woman. She's not particularly political, but she votes Democrat. And I was asking her what she thinks about all this. And she's like, I don't really care if it's presidency by group. Like, that's fine. As long as they keep enacting the policies I like. It's going fine so far. It's certainly better than with Trump. Like, whoever's around him is doing things I like. So yeah, I'm still going to vote for him. I think there are a lot of Democrats who feel that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think there's enough. I think ultimately, especially more independent-leaning Democrats and independents themselves want a president of the United States because, I thought one of the points Trump made in the debate, and I know that nobody paid any attention to anything other than Joe Biden's vacant stare during the debate, but there was one moment when Trump said to Biden, "You don't fire anybody. You never fire anybody." And it was absolutely true, right? Jake Sullivan said, 10 days before October 7th that the Middle East hadn't been that quiet in decades? He's still got his job. Mayorkas still has his job. What do you have to do to get fired by the Biden administration. So I think that's actually something that Trump should continue to hammer, because if the Democrats are going to say, oh, it's president by committee, well, the committee also sucks.
Yeah. Did you see that photo tweeted out over the weekend of President Biden's speech writing team?
Oh my God.
My
I just want to buy those kids like a carton of cigarettes and a bottle of bourbon or something. Like, how can this be?
They're still in the acne phase of puberty. It looks like a Columbia University, struggle session live and in the White House. It's terrifying. We'll put it on the board for the YouTube audience.
There's two of them in the corner doing work. I think they're filling out resumes. I mean, yeah, it's unbelievable.
Well, and Karine Jean-Pierre is in the background. She's their boss, which makes a lot of sense. Now I totally understand. Like this, okay, that makes perfect sense to me.
Have you seen this, Stu?
I don't think I've seen the photo. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but I have not actually seen
truly, it. If there's somebody there over the age of 24, it'll be a miracle. They've got of course, all the racial and gender and whatever boxes are checked. And I guarantee you these people know nothing, absolutely nothing about anything other than woke, diversity, DEI type issues. I want to get to this because to me, one of the things that's been really jarring about listening to Joe Biden speak is he cannot finish a thought or a sentence. And our audience is going to hear this repeatedly during some of the sound bites that we've pulled for today, because this is a problem. He's the leader of the free world. And here's just one example. This is right at the top of the interview with Stephanopoulos. Listen to him.
The whole way I prepared, nobody's fault, mine. Nobody's fault but mine. I prepared what I usually would do, sitting down, as I did come back with foreign leaders or the National Security Council, for explicit detail. And I realized about partway through that, I get quoted, the New York Times had me down at 10 points before the debate, 9 now, or whatever the hell it is. The fact of the matter is that what I looked at is that he also lied 28 times. The way the debate ran, not my fault, no one else's fault. No one else's fault.
What? First of all, this is how he speaks now. As I did come back, national security, he's missing words, many words in his operative sentences. And then in the middle of nowhere, he pivots to, I get quoted, New York Times had me down 10 points, which is untrue. The New York Times prior to the debate had him down 3 or 4, depending on which poll you look at, according to Nate Silver, not 10. Because he's trying to make the point in the middle of that sentence that the debate didn't cost him any points. He says, now I'm down 9. There was no substantive change. That's a lie. It's inaccurate at a minimum. He inserts it in the middle of nowhere. For what purpose? Why? It doesn't flow out of anything after national security advisors, and then goes back to, well, he lied 28 times. And this is like, you can't even follow the logic, the method of thinking, Stu, and all these cognitive experts will tell you this is yet another sign. It's a sign of cognitive abilities starting to shut down.
When I watch him speak, I often think of my 1978 MGB, British car. When you turn the key, a lot of times it does not start. And it makes noise, and it does things that sound like cars running, but it doesn't actually move you in any direction. And that's what it feels like watching him. I mean, it really is disconcerting, realizing that this guy is also supposedly negotiating with foreign leaders over major important things. I think the most scary part of this is that, like, you have a night like that debate night, and you realize your entire political life, legacy, career is on the line. You have days to address this and figure out a strategy. And the strategy actually is not the hard part, right? Like, the strategy is obvious. You go out there and you do a bunch of appearances where you look good. And if he were capable of doing that, he would have done it. This was his opportunity to go out there and shine. And look, I'll even judge it on a Joe Biden curve. Like, if every politician, you say 1 to 10 scale, all Joe Biden content falls between like 1 and 3. Like, the best Joe Biden speech ever is a 3 out of 10. I will
He's
judge
never going to be a Josh
curve.
Hawley.
Right. Yeah. If you put in a 2.5, you'd be okay with it. Get to a 3 out of 10, fine. He can't even do this. There are dozens and dozens of highly paid professionals around him, realizing what the stakes are for this campaign. All of them are uniquely and completely focused on making this one appearance seem like this man can actually do this job. He got to get through 20 minutes with a guy who was a Clinton operative. And even with that setup, he still fails. And the reason is because he is incapable of succeeding. That is a remarkable thing to say about the president of the United States.
He can't. I mean, I love it because you've got, I think it's the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is still on Team Biden, saying what he needs to do is a series of town halls and put himself out there for repeated interviews. Hello, McFly. They know that. He's not capable. You're so dumb. Do you think they don't know that? He can't do it. That's why everything has to be controlled, and it can only be given to Morning Joe, and he can only be given to 2 radio hosts who agree to ask the White House questions, and he can only be given to George Stephanopoulos, who was near tears. He was so upset with reeling off the president's approval ratings in the polls and so on. That's why they're doing it that way. The president was asked by Stephanopoulos about whether he will take a cognitive exam. We're going to get into this in detail in 2 minutes. We're going to take a break and then we're going to get back into the cognitive stuff in depth. But just listen to what he said to Stephanopoulos on that score. It's, what is it, Deb? SOT 7, I think.
Do you dispute that there have been more lapses, especially in the last several months?
Can I run the 110 flat? No. But I'm still in good shape.
Are you more frail?
No.
Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do. You know, not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world.
Would you be willing to have the independent medical evaluation?
Watch me there's a lot of time left in this campaign.
So no, he refuses to submit to an independent medical evaluation. He refuses to have a cognitive exam. And in the course of refusing that, he tells us, I'm not more frail than I was 3.5 years ago. I mean, that's just an absurdity. That I'm in good shape. The polls are not accurate. I'm not behind, and 36 is not my approval rating. Everything's denied or lied about, and I refuse to give you a cognitive test. My God, Dave.
I mean, I guess he did admit that he can't run the 100 in 10 seconds flat. So, I mean,
we got that.
At least that's true. Yeah, look, this isn't going to hold. The other night, my son and I watched Wag the Dog, right? And if you remember in that movie, there's a scandal. The president's up for re-election, and there's like the Firefly girl, and De Niro's character comes in as Mr. Fix-It. David Mamet wrote that movie, and one of the things that's sort of a drumbeat through it is you hear them say there's 2 weeks to the election, there's 9 days to the election, there's 7. And De Niro keeps saying, like, we just got to string this out for 11 more days. We just put them together. We can do this. This is 4 months. This is not going to hold for 4 months. If the election was next week, okay, you could produce a war, right? You could do it. This is not going to hold for 4 months if that's the best that Joe Biden can do. And so it's a hell of a pickle for the Democrats right now, because if he's refusing to leave, I do think they're going to have to one way or another remove him, even if it means invoking the 25th Amendment. I think they all know that this is not going to work.
Here was just some of the Democrat reaction to that interview with Stephanopoulos. David Axelrod, CNN contributor and former Obama guy, of course, after Biden says only the Lord Almighty could persuade me to give up this race, he writes, denial, delusion, defiance, Paul Begala, Clinton operative, it will not quell the growing anger. Nothing short of President Biden doing a Simone Biles triple flip with a double twist can make Democrats unsee that debate. Julian Castro, who ran against Biden in 2020 and raised the age issue then. You really see a president in denial and in a bubble. And Nate Silver, who I mentioned a moment ago, the guy to polling, says, I I wimped out in today's column and deleted a line saying that he should formulate a plan to transition the presidency to Harris within 30 to 60 days. But I'm there now. Something's clearly wrong here. And goes on to say, you can see in the ladder of being forced out, he's about halfway up. It's got things like back channel conversations about pushing him out, anonymous leaks to the press, influential non-electeds and donors say he should resign, backbench elected officials say he should resign, signals from senior party leaders that he should resign with plausible deniability, mega donors saying he should resign and withholding funds, normie senators or representatives saying he should resign. All of this is starting to happen. You know, Senator Mark Warner of Virginia trying to call this meeting, which has now been bounced to tomorrow. You've got 5 Democrats going into the weekend who openly called in the House for him to step down, another 6 saying so, or reverse those numbers, 6 going into the weekend, another 5 over the weekend joining the chorus. You've got leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer not saying anything publicly yet, but Pelosi saying we're entitled to answers on whether this is an episode or a condition. You've got top donors like billionaire Rick Caruso saying he is going to pause donations to the Biden campaign and urging Biden to step aside. So you can feel these wheels in motion still. And Politico this morning had a headline saying that several Democrats we spoke to view this Friday as a soft deadline for Biden to prove he's up to the job, lest the effort to force him aside get more aggressive and potentially more humiliating, which is just an absurdity. What's he going to do this week? He's going to do the Simone Biles triple flip, double back. I mean, like, what could he possibly do to satisfy them by Friday? They're waiting for polls. That's what they're waiting for. There was a sliver of good news for Joe Biden in that realm following a devastating New York Times poll that showed him 6 points behind Trump in likely voters, 9 points behind Trump in registered voters. There was a Bloomberg Morning Consult poll showing him having steadied the ship. We can talk about all of that, but I've got to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to get into the fact that it broke over the weekend, not once, not twice, 9 times over the past year. A Parkinson's specialist physician has visited the White House and met with President Biden's personal doctor and potentially with President Biden himself. Not one of these crack reporters covering the White House found this, disclosed it, or reported on it. The New York Post broke the story yesterday. There's been follow-up reporting since, and we went back and took a hard look at every single one of those visits and what, if anything, had happened in the president's world just prior. Wait until you hear this. It was Lenin who said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." Well, in the last 4 years, math and reading skills are on the decline, and let's not forget all the woke indoctrination. Plus, inflation is making things harder than ever. But there is some good news, and it's why I want to tell you about Freedom Project Academy. Freedom Project Academy was built on Judeo-Christian values and classical curriculum. Students read full books. They write in cursive. They study the full scope of history and graduate with knowledge years above their public school peers. They have payment plans, so you don't need to choose between paying the mortgage and ensuring your kids get a decent education. Save 10% on tuition when you enroll at freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. Check out their fully accredited courses, preview classes, payment plans, and request a free information packet today. Enrollment ends soon, so please don't wait. Take back your child's education at Freedom Project Academy. freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. All right, guys. So just a couple of news items that we got to go through. Today, Joe Biden wrote a letter to all House, I guess, congressional Democrats in the wake of these House members holding a phone call yesterday and several more coming out and saying he should step down, and the senators preparing a meeting of their own. And I'll read to you in part what he wrote. I want you to know that despite all the speculation in the press and elsewhere, I am firmly committed to staying in this race. I wouldn't be running again if I did not absolutely believe I was the best person to beat Donald Trump. We had a Democratic nomination process, and the voters have spoken clearly and decisively. This was a process open to anyone who wanted to run. Only 3 people chose to challenge me. One fared so badly, he left the primaries to run as an independent. He's speaking of RFKJ. Another attacked me for being too old and was soundly defeated. There he means, what's his name, who came on our program? The nice man from Minnesota. Dean Phillips.
Yeah.
The voters of the Democratic Party have voted. They've chosen me to be the nominee. Do we now just say this process didn't matter? That the voters don't have a say? I decline to do that. I feel a deep obligation to the faith and the trust of voters of the Democratic Party that they've placed in me to run this year. It was their decision to make, not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors. How can we stand for democracy in our nation if we ignore it in our own party? I cannot and will not do that. The question of how to move forward has been well aired for over a week now, and it's time for it to end. We have one job, and that's to beat Donald Trump. We have 42 days to the convention, ours, and 119 days to the general election. Any weakening of resolve or lack of clarity about the task ahead only helps Trump and hurts us. It's time to come together. So there you go. This is him saying, I won democracy. Listen to the will of the people. I mean, I have to say, this is very rich coming from a guy, Dave, who tried to take away the right of voters in several states to vote for Donald Trump by getting him bounced off, who unleashed the lawfare against Trump to try to get him put in jail so his voters couldn't vote for him. But now he wants to be the champion of, the voters have spoken. So we're just going to have to do what they said, ignoring the 72% of voters who, as James Carville's been jumping up about, are saying, we don't want him. He's too old.
Yeah. It's interesting because that is almost part of that anyway, is almost word for word what you're hearing out of Trump world, right? Laura Trump, chair of the RNC, is making this very same argument that, wait a minute, if you swap him out now, then how can you call yourself a defender of democracy, right? Especially if the idea is that some small cabal is going to decide, like, if it's Harris or it's Newsom or whoever it is. And look, I think it's probably Joe Biden's best argument, but it doesn't change the basic facts on the ground. And as I mentioned at the top, like, everybody kind of sees through the motivations here. And so we're just in this very, very weird place where until we know for certain whether he's going to be the nominee or not, I don't know when that's going to be. We're just going to be in this weird area of flux. But bet on this. At the moment at which Republicans and the Trump campaign feel that the door is closed and Biden is 100% going to be the nominee, we are going to be right back at he's unfit for office right now. And those attacks are going to be devastating. And they haven't started yet. I mean, Republicans really haven't started attacking him on this issue yet.
No, because they want him.
Because that's exactly right. But if
that's the difference between the three of us sitting on this set, I think, which is like, or at least, you said it, Dave, and I agreed with you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Stu, but
no.
I care about the country. I'm not a partisan. And so I want him out. He cannot be the president anymore. He is not fit to be the president, period. Yep. And let the chips fall where they may in the election. I think Trump will beat Kamala Harris. I think he'd probably beat any of these others that they're offering up. I think
he's clearly the favorite against any of them. I mean,
I think so. But yeah, it's to me, it's like we can't have an infirm, unfit president. We can't have that. And but right now, politically, Trump and Biden, Joe Biden, not Democrats, are exactly on the same page. They both want Joe Biden to remain the nominee.
Yeah, it's amazing.
If you take
sorry, go ahead, Stu.
No worries. I mean, if you take out, the survival of all of our families, I really want Joe Biden to be the president as well, the nominee as well. I mean, I am torn on this a little bit. And when it comes to politics, I think quite clearly you want Joe Biden to remain the nominee. If you're Donald Trump or anyone who thinks the stuff that Joe Biden has done has hurt the country, that's what I believe. I'm a little more concerned with Kamala Harris than most, just because Harris, who is terrible, she's absolutely terrible, clearly, but she's not worse at anything than Joe Biden is. She is, she's really, really bad at everything, but she's not worse than Joe Biden at anything. And one thing that she does do Because we can go through the whole list of candidates. One thing we can be certain of is that the Democratic Party is not going to pick another 81-year-old. Their largest problem in every poll with their own voters, with independents, with Republicans, is how old the candidate is. And if you solve that problem, all of a sudden you've got a 54 or 55-year-old running against a 78-year-old. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump's comparative polling, which is much better than Biden's on the issue of age, looks a lot worse in that particular region. If they could solve the one worst problem they have, it's certainly a more difficult path for Trump. And honestly, that scares me because you might not be looking at 6 months with Joe Biden as a bad president or an unfit president. You might be looking at 8.5 years of Kamala Harris. And I don't know. I mean, that sounds really bad as well.
I'm not sure. I think this is like, you go to the doctor and he says you have lung cancer and you're like, oh my God, that's terrible. And then he's like, but if you want to have pancreatic cancer, you can have that instead. Like neither of these is.
You just pulled lung cancer out of the air there, Megyn.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
Sorry.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm just saying. None of these is a good option. That's why the Democrats are
Dave,
in
I think
such
it's you
distress.
that's pulling lung cancer out of the air. That's kind of your gig, isn't it?
Right.
We're rooting for you, Dave. We want you to live. All right, when we come back, a deep dive into that Parkinson's doctor and what he was doing at the White House. Don't go away. If you were not following the news, a massive hit to the US dollar just came in June when Saudi Arabia did not renew its 50-year petrodollar deal with the US. Since 1974, Saudi Arabia has sold oil exclusively in US dollars, and that was huge to America's global economic dominance. Now they want options other than the dollar. So ask yourself, if there's less demand for the dollar, what happens next? Look, it's reasons like this that Americans are looking at Birch Gold Group. For over 20 years, Birch Gold has helped tens of thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text the word MK to 989898 and claim your free, no-obligation info kit on gold. That's MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold has earned the trust of so many with their education-first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and so many 5-star reviews. They've got an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Consider protecting your savings with gold before the dollar plunges any further. Text MK to 989898 today. Over the weekend, there was some bombshell reporting on the story of President Biden's health, reporting that could prove to be a key piece of the puzzle in determining what's wrong with him. First, from the New York Post's John Levine, who reported that President Biden's personal doctor, a man named Kevin O'Connor, met with a Parkinson's disease specialist at the White House back in January of this year. That specialist's name is Dr. Kevin Kennard. Okay, Kennard. O'Connor's the main doctor. Kennard is the Parkinson's guy. Then, on the heels of the New York Post reporting this news, Alex Berenson followed up and reported that this very same Parkinson's doctor had actually visited the White House's residence clinic 9 times over the past year. Most of the appointments set up by the Navy nurse who runs care for President Joe Biden. In fact, from what we've gleaned from the White House visitors log, we've looked at it now too, it's been on a near monthly basis that a Parkinson's specialist has been visiting the White House and the team that takes care of President Biden. So we did some digging of our own, looked back at the dates that Kennard, the Parkinson's guy, visited and what was going on with President Biden at or around the time. The visits actually started not in this past January, but a year ago, July 2023. Earlier on the day of Dr. Kennard's visit, the president traveled to Maine. Now, in this video, you see him come down the stairs of Air Force One and fail to salute service members waiting at the bottom of the steps. That's standard protocol. All the presidents do this. He knows this. Instead, he just blows past them and starts looking around like he's lost. He then walks off to the side and stops again. At one point, you see him then walk back toward a Secret Service member standing in back of him. He appears lost. Approximately a month later, the doctor visited the White House again, the Parkinson's guy. Days before he showed up, President Biden had been in Hawaii to survey the devastation from wildfires. While there, Mr. Biden struggled to say the names of various Hawaiian officials, including both of Hawaii's Democratic senators. This made headlines at the time, and we here on the MK Show reported on it. Watch.
Brian Chance, our senator, Senator Maisie. By the way, Maisie, I told my granddaughter, whose name is Maisie as well. She said, that's why I like her. Anyway, but her name is Maisie as well. And Jill Takuda.
The president also appeared to be very pale during that trip, some suggesting he appeared to fall asleep at an event. Look at him in this video. He looks ghost white. A week later, Dr. Kennard was at the White House again. This visit came days after President Biden made this incoherent and rambling comment about shootings that had happened in Florida, and he made numerous factual errors. Again, a story we reported at the time.
And so we have to act against this hate-fueled violence, and you saw what's happening there. By the way, almost 5 years to the day that 5 young blacks were killed in Jacksonville 5 years earlier at a gun shop, a store they were doing kids' toys. But you know, and we have to speak out that there's a whole group of extreme people trying to erase history, trying to walk away from it. I mean, the idea that we're sitting here, I never thought that I'd be president, let alone be president, and having a discussion on why books are being banned in American schools. And you know, as an administration, we're going to continue to march forward, jobs and freedom that we've worked so hard for.
You can hear him again, slurry, not completing his thoughts, incoherent, talking about this shooting. What seems to be happening here is after speaking about a 2023 shooting in Florida, he was trying to discuss a different shooting that happened exactly 5 years earlier in Jacksonville, but he had all of the facts wrong. In that 2018 shooting, the gunman opened fire at a video game tournament at the Chicago pizza restaurant, not a gun shop or a store doing kids' toys. 2 were killed, not 5, as he said. 1 victim was black, 1 was white, not 5 young black people. Moving on now. The doctor visited again on October 13th, which was understandably a significant time of stress as the Hamas terror attack on Israel had just taken place. He again visited on November 17th, a day before President Biden had referred to China's President Xi as a dictator, causing the president's Secretary of State to visibly wince and shake his head.
President, after today, would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator? This is a term that we used earlier this year.
Well, look, he is. I mean, he's a dictator in the sense that he is a guy who runs a country that is a communist country that is based on a form of government totally different than ours.
There was no White House visit listed in December, but the president was out of town for a large portion of that month. On January 17th, the doctor visited again. This is the visit that prompted the Post to report on this today, and they saw it first. And it happened to come just days after the president mistakenly suggested that he was still in the Senate during an event in Pennsylvania. Of course, he has not been a U.S. senator since 2009.
My name is Joe Biden. I work for the government of the Senate.
President Biden also appeared to get lost while being introduced to people. He's led around, stopped, he's wide-eyed, he makes odd gestures. He looks down, then motions for someone to come over before shaking hands. A few days later, during a rally in Virginia, President Biden mumbled a bizarre, slurring message about women and former President Donald Trump.
We'll teach Donald Trump a valuable lesson. Don't mess with the women in America unless you want to get the benefit.
On January 26th, that White House meeting occurred that the New York Post reported on, involving 4 people. The Parkinson's expert, President Biden's personal doctor, a cardiologist, and an unidentified 4th person. We do know that President Biden was at the White House that day. In fact, he had held meetings with congressional leaders. We also know that the president's official schedule was clear at the time of the doctor meeting. When questioned by the New York Post, a White House spokesman said, quote, "A wide variety of specialists from the Walter Reed system visit the White House complex to treat thousands of military personnel who work on the grounds." However, the spokesperson refused to answer questions about who the doctors were meeting with that day and did not say that it wasn't President Biden. About a month later, President Biden's personal doctor would issue his own summary about the president's health after conducting his annual physical. He had noted that he had specialty consultations with various people from Walter Reed, but he did not name the doctors. This is O'Connor. He's not naming Kennard nor anyone else. He also noted the specialties included neurology and cardiology. Dr. Kevin O'Connor said that the other doctors concur with his findings and that President Biden, quote, "continues to be fit for duty and fully executes all of his responsibilities without any exemptions or accommodations." That report was promptly panned by people such as former President Trump's and Obama's former doctor, Ronnie Jackson.
The whole report is absolutely ridiculous. It's nothing more than the White House's effort to check the box and hope that we'll move on from this. The fact that they didn't do a cognitive test as part of this physical exam, they did a neurological exam. There's 5 parts to a neuro exam. One of them that they conveniently left out, the one that we care about, is the mental status exam. We have nothing on his mental status. This was a complete joke by Dr. O'Connor. And, you know, if he were serious about this, he would have done a thorough, comprehensive, objective exam that included a cognitive exam. And he would have stood up before the press in the press briefing room and he would have defended it and he would have answered questions. But he doesn't because he doesn't want to answer the questions because he's going to have to lie.
There would be another visit by the Parkinson's expert on March 28th and possibly more. The White House visitor logs don't go beyond March. Therefore, we have no way of verifying what happened in April, May, June, or July so far. What we do know, the White House has some explaining to do, and the American people deserve answers. Back with me now, Stu and Dave. Guys, as far as we can tell, his very first appointment, we don't know if it was his, but the Parkinson's doctor's first appearance at the White House, as we said, was a year ago, July of 2023, and he showed up, I think I said, on the 28th. We found out that the appointment for him to show up was made on July 11th. July 11th, Biden had been in the UK and appeared confused when he was meeting with King Charles. That may or may not have been the thing that set it off. Again, to underscore, we have no confirmation independently that all of those visits were for President Biden or were him examining President Biden. But the American people deserve answers because on many of these visits, he was seeing the president's doctor. Was the president there? And Ronnie Jackson, the former doctor to Obama and Trump, says that this guy, Kevin O'Connor, is just a mouthpiece for Joe Biden. That's why Jill and Joe chose him. Said openly that this guy would say anything they want him to say. So there is plenty of reason to believe we are being misled by this White House. I don't know that the president has Parkinson's, but we deserve an answer on why a Parkinson's doctor visited the White House 9 times over the past year. A cognitive exam was apparently not performed at the president's annual physical last February, and the president is refusing to take one now. Your reaction to all this, Stu?
It's shocking that this could happen. It's not shocking that, he might be dealing with issues like this. I mean, it seems to be pretty consistent. I've had relatives that have had Parkinson's, sadly, and it's a really, really difficult thing to go through. As you point out, we don't know that that's what's going on, but it certainly would explain a lot. When you listen to those sort of moments where he's slurring and having difficulties, and we did this thing on Stu Does America a long time ago where we had the Joe Biden triangle of emotion, which was kind of, you could plot all of his gaffes on this triangle, and the 3 corners of it were funny, sad, and scary. And each one would kind of fit in a different slot. And at the beginning, I felt like a lot of them were funny. Not recently. But they all seem like they're sad or scary. I'm terrified for the future of our country, and I'm sad for this guy. Even though I think he's been considerably damaging to the country, I think he's been a terrible president, and I think he's done a lot of things to unravel the fabric of our nation. constitutionally and in so many other ways. But of course, as a human being, you feel terrible watching this happen, and you feel terrible that he has people around him allowing this to happen. Watching it in real time is really, really disconcerting. And you know, I go back, you mentioned Nate Silver earlier, who's a Democrat. Like, he doesn't want Donald Trump elected. But back in February, he wrote a piece talking about how it probably is wise for the Democrats to switch out Joe Biden for somebody else. And what he said at the time was, look, 75% of the American people think he's too old and can't do this job right now. And maybe we're wrong. But if we're wrong, let's take a moment now in February to prove it. Let's have him do, over the next few weeks, 4 interviews. And he outlined kind of generalized categories, one with like a major newspaper, one on one of the Sunday shows, one with maybe a center-right outlet like the Dispatch or something like that. Someone who would be tough, but, fair. Maybe kind of a wild card interview, like a Joe Rogan or something that he'd be out of his element, and just see how he handles those, and we can kind of make a determination. Instead of doing that, or some sort of approach like that, to see what was really going on, they intentionally hid it from all of us. And while, like, it's true, they did have a massive cover-up to hide this from reporters, it's hard to excuse them, because any human being with any level of an inquisitive nature would realize you have to ask more and more questions. You have to get to the bottom of this. And I think they all knew that this was going on at some level, but chose to hide it from us. And now they're getting burned by what they've created here. And so I feel really bad for him and his family, but I feel worse for the country, because we are now in a situation where we have a president who obviously can't do this job and has been sheltered to an extent that is disgusting. I mean, I don't know why they agreed to the debate in the first place. If they were going to go down this road, they should have just said, I will not debate a convicted felon, and hid even further. I mean, thank God they actually allowed this debate to happen, so at least the American people can see this before it's too late.
Dave, what do you make of this? I mean, if we've had we know the Parkinson's doctor has been there almost every month over the past year. And if he was meeting with President Biden, the man who refuses to take a cognitive test. And by the way, he's got multiple expertise. So it could be another, there's other forms of dementia that he could potentially be handling. It's a massive scandal. And there wasn't a single White House reporter, people who literally get paid to do things as tedious as look at the White House visitor logs every day, who thought anything of it. Or is it that they understood it was dynamite and they didn't want to touch it because they understood it could hurt him?
Well, I'm very confused, because I have been constantly told that this is the most transparent White House in the history of the United States of America. Karine Jean-Pierre says that basically every day. And of course, the reason that she says it is because it's so blatantly not true. And so obviously not true. So, it really is amazing. But it's interesting. Stu said something interesting about that Nate Silver piece back in February, right? Because all three of us have spent basically since Biden became president, we've all been asked over and over, do you think he's going to run? Do you think he's going to run? My opinion varied over time. I was generally in sort of like the 50-50 range, but there was always one caveat that I mentioned. I always said, listen, you have to factor in a 10 to 15% chance that something just flat out medical happens, right? He has a stroke, he dies, right? So and that has to go in the half of he's not going to be the nominee. And I think that's what happened. I mean, increasingly to me, and I think that wonderful reporting by your team, Megyn, by the way, and also like how indispensable is the New York Post.
Amazing.
And John Levine for finding that first story and opening the floodgates here. But yeah, I mean, this is a mess. Everybody feels lied to. If that guy's been there 9 times in the last year, Megyn, like that's not. There's no innocent explanation for this.
No, there isn't. And you know what? If there is, then give it to us. Let's hear.
Yeah, exactly.
Give us a name. Tell us. Yeah. You don't have to identify somebody because of HIPAA, but you can say a general in the Navy. But that's my understanding is he was there, at least for sure on that first occasion, to see the president's doctor, this Kevin O'Connor, and met with him. And as we pointed out, may have met with the president as well, who we understand was there that day. And why? Who was he seeing? What doctor comes to the White House for some random staffer, right? The random staffers, like the rest of us, go to the doctor. The doctor does not come to us. We deserve answers about all of this and whether the sitting president of the United States has Parkinson's or any other issue relating to brain health or cognition. They can't keep hiding it. All right. I do want to mention on the subject of the lying White House liars that it does appear to have been known by everybody around him. We weren't the only ones. We just were the only ones reporting it. Now we're getting the more in-depth reveals about what they knew and when they knew it. And the latest is courtesy of Olivia Nuzzi, who's been on this program. She writes for New York Magazine. She's an excellent reporter. And she does an in-depth piece entitled, "The President's Mental Decline Was Like a Dark Family Secret for Many Elite Supporters." She's getting some shit for only posting this on July 4th, right? Some of the things in here happened a long time ago. But I will say she did raise problems that she noted in the president's cognitive abilities back in 2020. So this is not her first time reporting on this, unlike many on the left. But here's in part what she talks about. She starts with a story about President Biden at a private New Jersey fundraiser with powerful Democrats and rich campaign donors the Saturday after the debate. It was at Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey's house. She says the content of his speech would matter less than his perceived capacity to speak coherently at all, though much of what he would say would not be entirely decipherable. Reporters were whisked away, the ones who were supposed to provide constant coverage of his movements. It was made clear that they would be permitted limited access to observe his remarks. Instead, they were whisked away from the reception or wrangled. She said she began hearing stories about the president's mental health in January. And obviously, she'd expressed some before that. In January, I began hearing similar stories from Democratic officials, activists, and donors, all people who supported the president and were working to help reelect him. Following encounters with the president, they had arrived at the same concern. Could he really do this for another 4 years? Could he even make it to Election Day? They did not wish to come forward with their stories. They did not want to blow a whistle. When they discussed what they knew, what they'd seen, what they'd heard, they literally whispered. They were scared and horrified, but they were also burdened. They needed to talk about it, though not on the record. They needed to know that they were not alone and not crazy. She writes, for example, about this disturbing interaction. Longtime friends of the Biden family, who spoke to her on condition of anonymity, were shocked to find the president did not remember their names. At a White House event last year, a guest recalled with horror realizing that the president would not be able to stay for the reception because it was clear he would not be able to make it through the reception. Number two, saying hello to one Democrat mega donor and family friend at the White House recently. The president stared blankly and nodded his head. The first lady intervened to whisper in her husband's ear, telling him, say hello, and giving him the donor's name and to thank them for their recent generosity. This is literally what we do with our 3-year-olds. Say thank you to Mr. Whatever, the neighbor who brought you this nice toy. The president repeated the words his wife had fed him. It hasn't been good for a long time, said this Democratic mega donor, but it's gotten so much worse. A witness to the exchange told me, so much worse. A few more. She writes about Jill Biden seeing Olivia in April at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They were in the basement for a photo op with the president. In the basement, I smiled and said hello. She looked back at me with a confused, panicked expression. It was as if she had just received horrible news and was about to run out of the room and into some kind of a family emergency. Hi, she said. Then she glanced over to her right. Oh. I had not seen the president up close in some time. I had skipped this season's holiday parties and preoccupied with covering Trump's legal and political dramas, I followed the First Lady's gaze and found the president. Now I understood her panicked expression. Up close, the president does not look quite plausible. It's not that he's old. We all know what old looks like. Bernie Sanders is old. Mitch McConnell is old. Most of the ruling class is old. The president was something stranger, something not of this earth. My heart stopped as I extended my hand to greet the president. I tried to make eye contact, but it was like his eyes, though open, were not on. His face had a waxy quality. He smiled. It was a sweet smile. It made me sad in a way I can't fully convey. I always thought, and I wrote, that he was a decent man. If ambition was his only sin, and it seemed to be, she's on the left, he had committed no sin at all by the standards of most politicians I had covered. He took my hand in his, and I was startled by how it felt, not cold, but cool. The basement was so warm that people were sweating and complaining they were sweating. This was a silly black tie affair. I said hello. She knew him well. She'd covered him for years. His sweet smile stayed frozen. He spoke very slowly and in a very soft voice. "And what's your name?" he asked. Exiting the room after the photo, the group of reporters, not instigated by me, I should note, made guesses about how dead he appeared to be, percentage-wise. 40%? One of them asked. This was in April. In April, guys. This is a five-alarm fire for the country. And the left can rally. Joe Biden can rally. Let's see if it'll include Schumer and Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries. But the rest of us have an obligation to continue reporting the truth about his infirmity. Because what if they do get behind him, Dave, and they pull this man over the finish line, and somehow, like we just saw happen in France, the left rises up at the last minute and says, the right is too much for us. And this guy gets reelected to another 4 years.
Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, maybe Biden needs to do like a balance of nature ad with like a before and after where like, he's fine or something. I feel bad for, well, I don't feel bad, but I think Nuzzi was in a tough spot there, right? Like, this isn't something I have to deal with very often because I'm a columnist, not a reporter, but reporters have to sit on things sometimes, right? The whole reason that people are willing to give them information and access is because they trust that information and access is going to be presented to the American people in a way that's not awful for them, right? There is a sort of game that goes on here. I do wonder what the editorial relationship is like. It's always a little different, but like if she's going back to her editors at New York Magazine in April and describing this encounter to them, then at that point, I think at least New York Magazine has an obligation to pursue that story, even if they're not going to burn her sources, even if they're going to let her take her time and do whatever she's doing. What she described, and I thought in pretty decent writing there, was the look in the eyes that they can't fix. It's exactly what we saw in the debate. It's that vacant, as she put it, otherworldly stare. And the fact of the matter is, Joe Biden could recite the entirety of Homer in perfect ancient Greek. But if his eyes look like that, he can't be president of the United States, and everybody knows it.
She said she planned on publishing this before the debate, but that she had to work on it, that she was trying to get those anonymous sources on the record. And the piece is always better when you actually have sources on the record. To me, she doesn't seem like a reporter who's afraid of blowback. I mean, her 2020 piece was pretty brutal on Joe Biden, and she writes about how she was ostracized from the White House for a long time because of it. So I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I'm grateful she wrote the piece.
But you got to be careful, like it's one of the pieces of advice. My mom was a criminal defense attorney and she represented a bunch of mobsters in Philly. And, she always told me, like, her piece of advice was like, listen, you can represent them, you can be cordial with them. You don't go to dinner. You don't go down the shore for a weekend, right? You don't go out on their boat because they get their hooks in you. And it's very hard for reporters because they need that access. And there is you know it, Megyn, there's a deal that goes on, and it's hard to stay on the right side of the line there if we even know where that line is.
That's why one of the reasons why I liked my post at Fox, because I could always do whatever reporting I wanted to do on Republicans or Democrats, and they would still have to deal with me because I had such a powerful post there. They couldn't ignore Fox News, and it was going to be hard to ignore me too. And over here, I've wondered. I wondered when I launched the show, should I interview politicians? Because they certainly don't have to come on the Megyn Kelly show.
Right.
But I don't want to be somebody who goes soft on them because I need ongoing access. And I thought about it a lot before I interviewed Trump, before I interviewed DeSantis. And I think anybody who watched either one of those interviews, never mind what I did with Nikki Haley when she came on, or Vivek, all of them, would know I just chose to do journalism and let the chips fall where they may. But you're right. It's a consideration for those who are in the game. The fact that reporters are openly, Stu, before this debate, talking about just how dead is he, 40%, right? Those same reporters, none of whom, take it off of Olivia, who else reported this? Who else talked about Joe Biden in April at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in this condition? Nobody. And by the way, the First Lady is gross. She's the villain in all of this, as far as I'm concerned. She's out there right now. This just came across my phone. Here she is in, North Carolina? Yeah, she's in North Carolina, saying she's all in on his reelection campaign. She plans to make 3 stops in 3 separate states. Joe's made it clear he's all in, and that's the decision he's made. Just as he's always supported me, I'm all in too. Sure, it's just because he decided. So you're all in. All of us know if our spouse were in this condition, we would hug them right into retirement. We'd be sitting on the couch next to them watching Matlock. I think this president's in the condition where you can just keep repeating the same episode over and over and over. How dare she pretend this is a normal campaign and it was just a bad night? That's her messaging he's repeating, not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to watch this happen. Watching the media react to this, I think it was Derek Thompson over at The Atlantic, who I like. I think he does a lot of good stuff. And he was kind of like frustrated about how, well, people are saying this wasn't covered. Of course, Biden's age was covered. And it was by some. I mean, we've mentioned a few of them that, Olivia did some of this. Nate Silver is not really a reporter, but he talked about this. David Axelrod, right, was on television mentioning these sorts of concerns. There were some, but not nearly what was required for this moment. And as you go through that story, I mean, I remember where I was standing in my house when I was on the phone with my grandma, and for the first time, she didn't know who I was. It's like one of the worst moments of my life. I loved her to death. And every time I think about it, it's terrible. Like, I remember that moment where she just couldn't track who I was anymore. I would remind her, and multiple times in the conversation, she would lose it and ask me again. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And the family's response to that was not to say, hey, what else can we get out of her before she's gone? That was not ever part of the consideration. It was, how do we make her comfortable? How do we make her last days the best that they can be? How do we spend time with her and enjoy her while she's still here, when she's still a little bit with us? It's the exact opposite calculation with these people, and it's revolting.
And the notion, as reported in Politico this morning, that they think he's got till Friday to really dazzle them, these Democrats, like prove that he can be the nominee. What a joke. What is that? All these stories that she's writing about match up with what we've seen with our very eyes. The waxy complexion, the seeming like you're not there, the getting lost all the time, the believing dead people are alive and alive people are dead. All of that, not knowing who people are, right? Like getting confused constantly about identity, names, dead or alive, all of it. There was just new reporting over the weekend, because now the knives are out for him, about Jackie. Remember the Where's Jackie moment? When he thought Jackie Spires was alive. She was a Republican who had just died in a car crash shortly before this bipartisan event that he was celebrating, and she was part of the Republican coalition that joined with Dems to make this thing happen. He had gotten up, and at that event, he said, "Where's Jackie? She was supposed to be here." Do we have it? Yeah, we have it. Here it is. Look, SOT 17.
I want to thank all of you here for including bipartisan elected officials like Representative Governor, Senator Braun, Senator Booker, Representative Jackie. Are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here.
Yeah. So, just so the audience knows, they had run an in memoriam video about Jackie right before he stood up. His team helped put it together. He knew she was dead. She had recently passed. And now it comes out that his team had put in prompter for him that she had died and to pay respects. So he couldn't even comprehend either what he had just read or what he'd skipped over. I'm not sure what his failing was there, but he couldn't hold on to the fact that she had died. So all of what's in the Nuzzi report matches up perfectly with what we've seen ourselves, and it is ongoing. Just this weekend, he got out there and told this long, rambling story. I'm not even going to take a shot at trying to explain to you what this was about. I'm just going to play it, and you tell me when it's done what this story was about. SOT 16.
But I tell you what, after I went to a local parade, a little parade in a little place called Hockessin, Delaware, right on the Pennsylvania border after our son had passed, and I was sitting there at home thinking it was his favorite parade, so I decided just to go into it. And I was walking along in this small community, and 4 guys about your size came running up to me. I thought the Secret Service was going to kill them. And when they came running up, swear to God, true story, said, "Joe, what's all this damn stuff about Pennsylvania? You're from Delaware. You're from Delaware." Yeah, but it never leaves you.
Huh? And you can see at the end there, Dave, Jill Biden, she's behind him. And when she realizes what he's doing, she starts moving right up. And we saw that again this week. Like, that was this weekend, but we've seen that repeatedly now. She's his handler. She's the one who's going to take the helm of stopping us from seeing his decline.
Yeah, I wrote in my column immediately after the debate. I wrote these words within 5 minutes of it ending. I said, the question going into the debate was whether Joe Biden was fit to be president for 4 more years. The question after the debate was whether he was fit to be president for 4 more days. That's where we are now. Think about the fact that we're deciding whether this guy should be president 3 years from now.
Oh my gosh.
This is not, I almost think of it this way, right? 3 years when you're in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s, things change, right? It's not that big a difference. Big difference between being 14 and 17, right? Big difference between being 12 and 15. Big difference most of the time between being 84 and 87. The fact that we're even contemplating this guy being in charge of the country, the most powerful man in the world, for 4 more years? They're literally chanting 4 more years. It's abjectly insane. Nobody can look. Don't even look at Joe Biden from 2020. Don't make that comparison. Make the comparison to 2022. In the last 2 years, he has changed completely. Like this is madness.
Yeah. Just this past weekend on your diagram, Stu, of funny and sad. Now they're all sad. This one is sad, but it's like kind of funny. I'm not going to lie. When someone showed it to me, I was like, "What?" This is Biden claiming he was the first Black woman to serve with a Black president. Sorry, but it was given on a radio interview with WURD in Philly over the weekend. It's SOT 11.
This is a guy, as I said, questioning George Floyd's humanity, led the birther movement against President Obama, accused the Central Park Five. They should be in jail. By the way, I'm proud to be, as I said, the first vice president, first Black woman to serve with a Black president. I'm proud of All the first black woman in the Supreme Court. There's just so much that we can do because together there's nothing. Look, this is the United States of America.
Okay.
And he had the questions.
Yeah. So he had the question. Well, let's get to that next. But the fact that he can't even he's not black and he's not a woman and he was not either of those things ever. And the White House is mad that people are nitpicking his words in reaction to that clip. And they got all over. Do we have it's the one soundbite from Stephanopoulos we didn't play. Is it SOD 8 where he says goodest? They're all over reporters for accurately reporting that he used the term goodest in his interview with George Stephanopoulos, saying he said good as, which, by the way, if you listen to the full sentence, makes no sense either. Grammatically, the syntax, none of it makes sense. But now they've started to nitpick all the reporters who are reporting on these gaffes as saying, oh, please, you don't let him get away with anything. But meanwhile, they've let him get away with everything, Stu.
It's true. I am a little disappointed in you, Megyn, for playing all these cheap fakes throughout the program. Highly edited, misleading videos that make people think this guy's not on as sharp as a tack. It's fascinating to watch this because all of the videos I think you've played that preceded the debate, I never read one mainstream media story discussing any of them. Now, they were serious. He was lost. I mean, when you were talking about the Parkinson's doctor and all those dates that you laid out like that, which was incredible, each one of those was massive. And conservative media hit that stuff. Like, we would talk about it, and they would say, "Oh, you're motivated as a partisan against him." And of course, obviously, I don't think he's a good president, and I don't want him to be president. So I think it's important for people to know this. It's important either way, even if he was a great president. But watching the media switch is remarkable. I mean, it must be incredibly jarring for the White House. There was another clip from this weekend that came out I saw it read in a New York Times story, and they described how he went on this tour. He was trying to prove himself capable, but he was still making these incredible gaffes. And they point out that on his 4th of July speech to military families, he called Donald J. Trump, quote, one of our colleagues, the former president.
We have that.
Yeah.
We have that. Stand by. I think it's SOT 13. Yeah. Listen.
And by the way, I was in that World War I cemetery in France. And the one that one of our colleagues, the former president, didn't want to go and be up there. I probably shouldn't even say it. Anyway. We got to just remember who the hell we are.
Oh my God. This is what he does.
Important advice.
He always starts, he'll swear now to sort of cover up a gaffe. He'll say, anyway, just to sort of change his train of thought abruptly in the middle of a sentence to cover up his incapacity still.
Yeah. And I mean, we played, I don't know, you've played probably about 20 different pieces of sound and video here in the show, and you weren't even really planning to play that one because it was sort of unremarkable, right? It was it wasn't bad. Honestly, probably doesn't even make the show cut today. It's probably on the cutting room floor. Yet the New York Times is highlighting it. What changed here? All of a sudden, they've realized that their goal, which is the same, to not let Donald Trump be president, is now served by getting this man out instead of keeping him in and hiding everything, right? All of a sudden, their goal is the same, but their mission has changed in a way.
So now you've got Jill Biden running to block him, from making another mistake. And weirdly, Ashley Biden reappears on the scene at the 4th of July celebration at the White House. I'm just showing you this video. Very strange. It shows President Obama dancing and arms wrapped around him. Sorry, President Biden dancing, kind of standing there looking at the fireworks with arms wrapped around him. Those are Ashley Biden's wrapped around him. And I don't know why. This is such an odd shot. But then suddenly you're going to see her arms go up and she starts kind of dancing. This is the one who said she took inappropriate showers with him in her diary. Dancing, okay. And now she bends down and gives the press or the visitors the ICU. like the fingers in the eyes and then pointing back to the people. I'm not sure what that's about. Is that a reference to the diary? Is she trying to, I don't know what's happening there, but the whole family is reportedly rallying around him. And now there are reports that there's a rift between the family and senior staff that's playing out. This is 100%. This is the senior staff saying the reason they're talking about getting rid of people like Anita Dunn is pre-debate scores that the evil family's trying to settle. But this is one of the last stages of dying for a politician, when the family and the intimate staff start publicly turning on one another.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it a lot. I mean, I think you saw this in I remember this happening in the McCain campaign back in 2008 over like Palin and stuff like that, right? And there's books about it and stuff. There was just sort of public dispute between the campaign and the family and like what are you doing? Yeah, that's a bad sign. And Stu's right. You keep playing these things. I mean, now you have to remember all the times that he went out in front of the media and said, "Oh, I better not because they're going to get mad at me." Right?
Yes.
Remember he would always do that. He'd go out and he'd completely change American foreign policy in a speech. And like 10 minutes later, there's text coming out from the White House like, "Oh, he didn't mean that." Or,
right.
That's not what he meant. So yeah, I mean, there's a mountain of these things. And I think what we've been poking at from different directions throughout the show is that, yeah, we had very good reason to suspect that it was bad. And yes, most of the liberal media, well, probably all of the liberal media chose to ignore very obvious signs. But we're past it. We're past it now. You can't.
It's too late. The jig
There's
is
no
up.
drug you can give him. There's nothing you can't get that look out of his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
If
So
there
now
was
they're
a way
trying
to
to
do
control
that-
everything.
And if you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
Right. So now Jill Biden tries to do the corral. So now I guess Ashley Biden's literally putting her arms around him to try to hold him up or show support. I don't know what the reason is. And the White House, meanwhile, is doing what it can, releasing the preferred questions to these radio hosts. This is the comeback tour. This is him trying to prove he's still got it, he's still vigorous. And so why do they feel the need to give pre-scripted questions to interviewers over the weekend as he tries to prove his vigor? Well, that's what happened in the case of two interviews he gave to, Civic Media radio host Earl Ingram in Madison, Wisconsin, and WURD radio host Andrea Lawful Sanders in Philadelphia. Both have large Black listener audiences. Neither is a journalist, but they were doing interviews of the president. And they humiliated themselves because they accepted said questions and asked them. I'm sorry, the sin is on them. The White House is disgusting and clearly doesn't believe in Joe Biden. But to actually ask the question when your integrity has been insulted in this way is to affirm the White House's assumptions about you, that you are a lapdog and you will do as instructed. And now the latter, Andrea Lawful Sanders, has been fired, which is the right move. Good for WURD. She never should have done it. And bizarrely, these two got on the air with CNN's Victor Blackwell and admitted it. That's how we found out. He asked them the question. These sound kind of like the same questions. How did that happen? And I think we have them admitting it in SOT 10, or at least one of them.
Were those questions given to you by the White House or the campaign, or did you have to submit questions ahead of this interview?
The questions were sent to me for approval. I approved of them.
Okay, so the White House sent the questions to you ahead of the interview?
Yes.
Okay.
I got several questions, 8 of them, and the 4 that were chosen were the ones that I approved.
And the gentleman later admitted he did the same, though, as far as I know, has not yet been fired. Nothing says he's robust and can do this job like, please, for the love of God, ask these pre-approved questions, please.
It's incredible. I mean, the fact that guy was admitted and the fact that they would even attempt it in the middle of this sort of comeback tour where he's supposed to prove his virility. I mean, it's just malpractice at a state that I can't even imagine. And like, at some level, you think of these people who are working behind the scenes trying to keep this guy in power by any means necessary. And if you suck out sort of the disgusting nature of that for a second and just think of it as a job, it's got to be a really difficult job, right? I don't know how you do it. I mean, I was watching him at this black church he was at this weekend, and he's sitting there, and there's people are standing there. People are dancing around him, and he just, that same empty look, just staring around. He was sitting at one point, a friend of mine said he looked like Scott Bakula from Quantum Leap, because he would always be dropped into these situations that he didn't know where he was, and he would have to sit there quietly and try to, I love that show too. And he would have to sit there quietly, like trying to figure out who he was and what he was supposed to do there. That's what it is for Joe Biden every single day. And like, if you could have just told him, Joe, just look around and smile. You're at a little bit of a party. You look around. It's a fun day. The church is there. Everyone's excited. All you have to do is smile, and nobody will notice at all.
Yeah,
I'm sure they told him that, but he couldn't.
If he were capable of it, it would have been done. I got to go, you guys. You're the best. Thanks so much for being here, Stu and Dave. We're back tomorrow on this breaking news. We'll see you then. Do you ever think, how can I work this hard and still be in debt? The piles of overdue bills, the threatening phone calls, never having money to do anything. It just won't stop. If you are trapped in debt, Done with Debt can be a way out. They have developed aggressive new strategies to end your debt permanently. Done with Debt stands between you and the harassing bill collectors. They tirelessly negotiate with your creditors to lower or even forgive what you owe. And they do it all without bankruptcy or new loans. One client said, one phone call saved us a fortune. I wish we did this long ago. Done with Debt has unique strategies to get you out of debt faster and put more money in your pocket every month. But you need to hurry, because some debt solutions are time sensitive and you don't want to miss out. Visit donewithdebt.com. Talk with one of their debt relief strategists for free. You've got nothing to lose except your debt. Go to donewithdebt.com. That's donewithdebt.com. Happy belated Independence Day. Hope you had a great 4th. As you may know, we have an annual celebration at our house. We do it every year, and hence annual. But this year, I was not sure at all that we could pull it off. In fact, I did not think we were going to be able to do it. We're in a rental this summer, as our house is having some work done at. And I just wasn't sure, like, where are the costumes? Where are the decorations? Whether the logistics could work at the rental. We were 2 weeks in Scandinavia. It was just a lot. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this is actually an important party. It's important to me, to my family, and I actually think it's got some importance to our friends and our neighbors at this point too. It's not just a celebration, it's a life lesson about the incredibly special foundation of our country. And it's a chance to bond with our community over our shared patriotism, something of great value. And sadly, it's more and more scarce these days. It's also something else. A great musical. Tradition. And those are important too. Year after year, people get used to the commitment of being with one another on this one day, saying the pledge together, singing the anthem together, making the country's birthday a real salute to our shared ideals. Our friends come over in the days beforehand to try on their costumes, which I get for the team because it's just fun for me. We play patriotic music and maybe have a glass of wine. This year, my hairstylist did our hair like colonial ladies. We skipped the wigs, most of us gals, and it was such a joy getting ready with my friends. This is the before picture. Our kids and their friends never say no when we ask them to suit up. They don their get-ups just as readily as the adults do. And everyone knows what a fun day this is. They have zero qualms about dressing the part. It really does add something to the festive nature of things, right? To have like, kind of just the costumes and the whole production. On the big day, we put on a little play about the lead up to the Declaration of Independence and the state of mind of the founding fathers at that point, before we get to the big reading. And those of us who are on stage meet and go over the script. that Doug and I draft together. That too is entertaining and full of anticipation. This year, those of us we were in the kitchen and we read it. And it was so fun, like a table read. And then we did a shot of tequila before we went. And I think that's also what Thomas Jefferson did before he. We laugh at ourselves and each other. We get into character and all the absurd, over-the-top ways a hoop skirt or a colonial wig might inspire. This year, we actually stole a few lines from the play, The American Revolution, in which you may remember our 10-year-old Thatcher played Betsy Ross earlier this year, along with his fourth grade buddies. Here we are on the 4th with some of those borrowed lines.
A line has been drawn, and I, for one, am prepared to cross it.
I am with you, brother. No more driving on the left-hand side of the road. No more calling soccer football.
Give me liberty or give me death.
Then it was on to the main event, the reading of the Declaration, which really is stirring when you hear it read out loud and with vigor.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Yes.
And so for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
But the best part, the absolute best part, has become the big finish, which is when the marching band comes down the street, pounding away on their drums as they approach, only to burst into song upon arrival, including, of course, the national anthem. We started this last year, and it was a Herculean effort to find a marching band, as you may have guessed. But my assistant, Abigail Finan, has magical powers that made it happen. For me, this moment is pure happiness. Last year and this year, I cried tears of joy when that marching band came down the street. There's just something about them. And I had many of my friends stop me and say they had the same feeling. People are looking to feel patriotic. They're looking to be reminded about what's great about this country and feel all the feels that you get when you sing those words and think about the lyrics of the anthem. Looking around, seeing our kids singing it, hands on their hearts, alongside our neighbors, our friends, our community, all joined together in song, in celebration of America. It's one of those moments you experience knowing every second that passes has become an instant treasured memory. Eventually, the party wound down, and some of our friends migrated to the backyard where we let our hair down a bit and partied, colonial style, able to relax now that the big show was over and just enjoy being in each other's company. We wrapped the evening watching the fireworks together, the bombs bursting in air, thinking about the beauty and the majesty and the excitement of the night sky and of the day behind us. On Sunday, our family went to Mass, where, as they did last year, they ended the Mass with the congregation singing God Bless America. What a perfect and beautiful way to cap off our celebratory weekend. And though I'm pretty sure it's not allowed, I did sneak a recording of the moment. I didn't get anybody on camera because I wanted you to share in it.
Oh
Ah, what a way to end the mass. If you were born in the United States of America, you hit the lottery. The home of the free and the brave, a place where anything is possible, where merit and hard work can make all the difference for anyone, irrespective of class or background, where the poorest of kids can grow up to be president, black, white, doesn't matter. Or a kid like J.D. Vance, I've been thinking about him lately, who was raised in Appalachia, without a steady father figure, with soda in his baby bottle, with verbal and physical abuse all too frequent, can grow up to find himself on the short list for Vice President of the United States. That's us. The land of opportunity. Yes, still. More than ever, in fact. America, the liberator of Europe and savior of the world. The winner of the Cold War. The world's greatest superpower. Still. The dominant force in the global order. Still. The country that invented rock and roll, the personal computer, the internet, the light bulb, the airplane, blue jeans, the polio vaccine, the telephone, movies, sliced bread. That was us. The country to which millions all over the world flock, hoping for a chance at a better life. Immigration remains a tough issue in the U.S., but there is a reason that, by a wide margin, America has more immigrants than any other country in the world. People would do anything to live here, to have an American passport, American birthrights, American rights. And most of us were born with that. So celebrate, not just on July 4th, but every day. Take some time to treasure the gift of being an American and say happy birthday to this gorgeous country of ours with its sweeping plains, majestic mountains, sparkling natural lakes, borders flanked by deep blue oceans, and tell your kids to do it too. Godspeed, America, and God bless. Thanks for joining me today. See you tomorrow.